I'm Heather Smith and welcome to the Accounting Apps podcast, exploring the accounting and business apps community. Today, I'm sharing with you the audio from a session I hosted as part of the Australian CFO Summit produced by Weel. It's called Scale Your Business on Xero Without Needing a Dozen Other Apps and Add-ons. The presenter is Michael Wood, who is the founder and CEO of Translucent. You may recall he was on the podcast in May debating John Toon on Excel versus software. The team at Translucent have asked me to mention they have boots on the ground in Australia and they are committed to serving Australia and New Zealand in their own time zone. I'm always grateful for the opportunity to craft and create and host accounting technology webinars. If this is ever something I can help you with, please get in contact. I'd also encourage you, if you'd like to stay informed about what's happening in the accounting technology space, subscribe to the Accounting Apps podcast, jump online and subscribe to the Accounting Apps newsletter available at heathersmithau.com and join the Accounting Apps Mastermind group. Hello everyone and welcome back to the 2024 Australian CFO Summit. I'm Heather Smith and I'm a chartered accountant and apps expert, and I asked the lovely people at Weel if I could host today's session with Michael Wood. Every time I hear Michael talk, it's deeply thought-provoking and inspirational. I've known Michael for over a decade and I'm privy to what he is about to share today, and I'm excited for all of us here today as I know this is going to be a sensational session. So while Weel, the streamlined spend management solution, is the team behind the event today, we couldn't do it without our wonderful sponsors. So a big thank you to Visa, Translucent, Fathom, Trace and Mayday for making today possible. Now for the main attraction. Let me introduce Michael Wood. Michael co-founded Receipt Bank in 2010. Receipt Bank, or what we now call DEX, grew to be the number one Xero app around the world. In 2022, Michael founded Translucent to fix the problems of groups and multi-entity businesses. Michael, welcome to the CFO Summit.
Heather, thank you. That is an unbelievably kind introduction. And everyone, hello. Heather said she's speaking from sunny Brisbane, and everyone looking at my background, it's probably worth just me mentioning that actually I am in London and it's about 2 a.m. here, rather than someone worrying that somewhere in Australia there's been some kind of blackout of the sun. So hence the slightly weird sort of colouring and things in the background. But anyway, let me share screen and begin. I say that, I'll do that with ease. There's a fair chance I muck it up, but let's see. All right. Now, hopefully that's all coming through for everyone. Cool. I won't, as I'll be sort of speaking, I won't be sort of monitoring the chat as we go. So Heather, if there's anything...
that's my job.
Yeah, we can jump in. So everyone, again, hello. I'm talking today about scaling your business on Xero. And in some ways, what a tremendously dull title, because people have been scaling their business on Xero for about 15 years. And most people on this call, I have no doubt, have significant experience on scaling their business in Xero. So in some ways, it's an incredibly dull title. But hopefully we get something to a little more interesting when I talk about scaling your business on Xero without needing a dozen other apps and add-ons, which of course has been the way it's been done over the last 15 years. So anyway, I'll jump right in. Heather gave a little bit about my background, just go over it sort of very quickly. In 2010, I founded Receipt Bank. As Heather mentioned, we were very privileged to build Receipt Bank into the largest Xero app globally, over 1 million users, 10,000 plus accounting firms around the world. And maybe even more pertinently, Receipt Bank was something like 8 offices around the world. We had offices and, importantly, legal entities, and maybe even more importantly, Xero files in Australia, in New Zealand, in South Africa, in Canada, in the USA, in the UK. We had accounting software in France and in Bulgaria, and I might be missing one out, but that's about it. But basically, I had experience of exactly what you guys are probably going through, of building significant businesses and moving beyond the sort of the basic use case of what Xero was designed for. Instead of being a single business, a single entity, a single Xero file, I experienced the issue in 2015 or 2010, 2015 of running multiple Xeros around the world. And in the end, we ended up moving to NetSuite. And it's not really sort of part of the story of that migration and that move and the costs and the issues and the pros and the cons. So I don't really talk about that today, but it's definitely sort of feeds into this story. So anyway, built Receipt Bank up. In 2018, by then I'd stepped back just onto the board, but the new management rebranded Receipt Bank as Dext. And then a couple of years later, 3 years later, the business was sold for several £100 million, which is a great return for shareholders and everyone. And then arguably, this is the point where you think I'm an idiot. Instead of retiring to the beach, I decided to do it all again. And so founded Translucent in 2022. So Translucent's still quite a new business. And I'll just touch very quickly on what Translucent is. Translucent has been designed to fill what I call the Xero NetSuite gap, exactly back to that experience I just talked about. Xero and realistically around the world, all SMB accounting software is designed explicitly for single entity businesses, but lots and lots and lots of us try to tie the SMB accounting, the best SMB accounting software in each country together for mid-sized businesses, for multi-entity businesses. And that's what Translucent is designed for, to be connected to the likes of Xero to provide a world-class solution for businesses in that situation. And then, of course, we're not trying to take out or really compete with NetSuite for those much larger companies, enterprise companies. So that's what we're doing at Translucent. We work with the likes of Xero to fill what I call the Xero NetSuite gap. But anyway, we can talk a bit more about that towards the end. So the agenda today is really focused on the volumes of software that all of us are working with and dealing with across the businesses. So we have way, way more software than we used to. I've used the phrase 10x more software than we used to. I think I could make a pretty good argument. It's more like 100x, but we'll talk about that. I'd like to pose the question, how much software does everyone have in their businesses today? And then maybe the core point I'd like to make, or maybe definitely the core point I'd like to make today, is although software has gone through this huge Cambrian explosion, this vast volume of software we have today compared to where we have in the past, it's about to accelerate and explode again. And so given we have so much software, given we have such software abundance today, and given that abundance, one might say you ain't seen nothing yet, what does it mean for each of us in our businesses and for those of you in the role as CFO? And hopefully then I can give some insights into what the smart money is doing around the world with this situation. I'm very privileged to be on the boards of several companies, an investor in many companies, and sort of plugged in Silicon Valley, as well as sort of seeing companies with my sort of day job as Translucent. So hopefully I can provide some insights there. And I'll just quickly grab a drink. So I've said we have 10 times more software than we used to, but let's not worry about the exact number. We have way, way, way more software than we used to. And the way I like to think about this is in terms of eras. We used to live in the desktop era, and one can sort of quibble about when the desktop era went until. But most people would sort of argue the cloud era began about 2008, 2009, 2010, that kind of era. And the desktop era, for those that are as old as me and remember it, software was limited, and it sounds bizarre to say it now, but software was limited by retail shelf space. Of course, it was sold in CDs and DVDs, and it was what the retailers wanted to stock. So software was highly constrained by retail shelf space. Software was also constrained by the size of the software industry, which was so much smaller today. And I did think about putting up a slide of showing the biggest companies in the world. And whereas today it is dominated by software or software-related hardware, back then it was only Microsoft that featured in sort of the top 10 companies by market cap. So the desktop era software was constrained by the retail shelf space, by the size of the software industry, and really importantly, still user skepticism. when we launched Receipt Bank in 2010, I know when Xero started in 2007, a huge amount of the sales effort was just overcoming that skepticism of people to become software buyers. They weren't used to it. Obviously they had their Microsoft products and things like that, but they weren't routinely software consumers. So the desktop era, much smaller software industry. And then, as I say, we moved into the cloud era, the era that everyone will be familiar with, where we had some amazing technology breakthroughs around cloud, around broadband, around ubiquitous online devices. This spurred a much larger supply of software because the industry grew, and user enthusiasm was just completely different. And all of you will be significant consumers of software today, both personally and professionally. So we had this very different desktop to cloud era, and we can track it in real numbers. So in the desktop era, right at the beginning of the cloud era for finance and accounting, in 2011, there were less than 30 apps connected to Xero. And now today, there are more than 1,000 apps in the Xero App Store. So obviously that gives about a 40x growth rate. But actually, if you went back to the desktop era, I would make the argument there were only about 10 finance and accounting apps in each country. So that's where I get my 100x. I would argue in the desktop era, there was 10 and we've gone to 1,000 plus. So hence 100x. But anyway, it doesn't really matter the numbers. From the desktop era to the cloud era, huge explosion in software. And of course, it's not just finance and accounting software, it's everywhere. And I've just picked out a few of the different app stores here for sort of Salesforce, Shopify, iOS, just to make the point that it is all over the place. In no way is it a finance or accounting specific thing. Over the last decade, the cloud era, huge explosion of software. So an interesting question then is, how much software do you have? And this isn't one, of course, one could pose this personally. I could ask everyone sort of pick up their iPhones and go through how many apps they have and add it to the chat. And that would make the point personally. But I've been able to dig out some numbers professionally. So Okta, the sort of single sign-on work identity people, they can track the number of apps that work through their system. And hence give us an average number of apps per business. Now, I actually think these numbers are quite a significant underestimation because, as I say, it's only apps that work through their system, but still, it's useful to have some numbers. So for companies with less than 50 employees, 36 apps, less than 500, 58 apps, and all businesses, 93. So significant amount of software. As I say, this feels low to me. I remember in Receipt Bank back in about 2013, 14, we counted this number and it was 49 even back then. But we were a software company, so maybe we had quite a few more than average. But anyway, the point is made with this slide. Every business is now a significant consumer of software. Now, the crux of what I'm talking about, that software is going to 10x again. So we just talked a couple of slides ago about the cloud era being an era almost sort of unfettered, where there's way more software than there used to be in the desktop era. And that is true. But actually, the cloud era is still a significant supply-constrained industry. So it is constrained by the number of software engineers and the productivity of software engineers. Now, obviously, we've all heard the sort of dinner party or pub chat about, every country should be producing more STEM graduates, or maybe children should be learning to code. Of course, this is all predicated on the fact that software engineering capacity is finite and limited, and hence it is a good thing to increase it. So it is quite interesting just to step back and observe this, that the cloud era, although we think of it as an era of software abundance, is actually still supply constrained. And the era we're now in, and it won't surprise you, I've forgotten where I was going next. So again, I'm just replaying the data before of 2011 to 24. It's a 34% CAGR, that growth rate in cloud. But the next era, where I was about to go, is the AI era. It could have been called the no-code era, but I think given all the headlines already in, it'd be very surprising if it isn't going to be called the AI era. And the AI era is obviously going to be exciting. Everyone knows ChatGPT. Everyone's experienced sort of different apps that have either can legitimately call themselves AI today or are giving themselves that AI lick of paint to get attention today. There's obviously going to be a vast, vast number of really exciting AI applications. But I'm not going to talk about those. What I'm talking about here in the AI era is what it's going to do for the volume of software. So what it is already doing is massively increasing the productivity of the software industry. I think many of you will have heard about GitHub's Copilot product. It's not the only thing in the market, but it's the first product significantly increasing the productivity of engineers. And many software engineers are also using some of the OpenAI products and what they can do, especially around using different languages. And basically, the software industry in the AI era is going to become much, much more productive. But maybe even more importantly, AI will enable users to create the software they want. So it doesn't matter whether it's members of your finance team, members of your marketing team, people in manufacturing, people in HR, all across businesses, AI is going to enable users to create the software they want. So that is the crux of my argument of why we're about to see an explosion of software. And the software abundance we have today is only a fraction of what we're going to see in coming years. Now, I mentioned before from 2011 to 2024 in the cloud era, we had a 34% CAGR in the volume of software. If we were to play that forward for Xero, that would suggest by 2033, we'd have 18,000 apps in the Xero App Store. So even if we just kept growing at the rate we have been growing, we'd go from 1,000 apps on Xero to 18,000 apps on Xero. But I think I can make a good argument why this dramatically underplays it. And that is that although there are today 1,000 apps in the Xero App Store, there are actually more than 100,000 apps privately connected to Xero. So this is where businesses and software engineers have built their own tools using the Xero API and plugged in and doing things just for their own Xero files. And so I'm going to have to grab another drink. So yes, there's 100,000 apps privately connected to the Xero API on top of the 1,000 in the Xero App Store. Now, it's that number that's really going to explode first with AI as more and more people want to do things with their financial data. But it will become easier and easier for these apps, for people to share them, whether as paid for or free apps, but to share them in the Xero App Store. So given there's already 100,000 of those today, and given that there's every reason to believe because of AI that that number is absolutely going to explode, and remember, there's millions of users on Xero, I think that 18,000 number for the Xero App Store is a gross underestimation of where we'll get to. And actually, the number I have in my head is more like 100,000. I wouldn't push that on anyone. I wouldn't insist on it. But I think it's the kind of number we're going to see. So from the desktop to cloud era, we had 100x times more software. And I think from the cloud to AI era, once again, we're going to see 100x more software. As I say, I don't insist on it. I just make the point that in the cloud to AI eras, we are about to see way, way, way more software. And that's going to be across your businesses, every department. It's not just finance and accounting, although that's what I'm talking about. It's just going to be everywhere. So the question I pose for everyone is, are you and is your business ready for 10x more software? And of course, for you as CFOs, that hits you in two ways. It can hit you in the productivity you enjoy in the finance department and across the business. But of course, it will hit all your procurement processes as well. So what does it mean for me? And for me, I mean for each of us. So where I'd like to start is if we're in an era already of software abundance, It's actually, there's quite a lot of problems. Like, obviously, this growth in software has been amazing. We've been able to do so many things. We can do things faster. It has unlocked productivity for many people, for many teams, totally revolutionized many workflows. So there is obviously, and as a software guy, I'm going to talk about there's so many benefits, but I'm not blind to the fact that the software abundance causes quite a lot of problems. And what I thought I'd just capture on this slide is just some anecdotes, some comments I've overheard, some comments that you can see on forums, and I'm sure you've either spoken yourselves or in your businesses. They're not intended to be scientific. They're just meant to be sort of quotes and anecdotes. So I'm just going to put some of them up here. I'm not going to read them all out. I'll give you all time to read them. So as I say, just a number of quotes, anecdotes that just capture some of the issues today with the software abundance we have today. And the reason I think they're important to capture is they are real problems today. They affect us in our business. I see them affect other businesses. And I know they're widespread across finance teams around the world. And so what I've tried to in the next slide is just categorize them. So the first way is, with so much software around, so many software vendors and such software abundance, the first problem is payment and cost. Overpaying. Most people do not feel they are having an efficient software spend today. With so many vendors, it's inevitable there's huge overlap with what different vendors do. So therefore, you are clearly and explicitly paying for features more than once. Secondly, vendor management. It's really irritating. And I say that as a software vendor, and I'm sure many of you are software vendors, and you know it can be a bit cringe as you're pinging out emails saying, whether it's a change in pricing, whether it's an account management issue, whether it's just trying to get people on the phone. Every extra vendor is an extra burden of vendor management. The second problem of software abundance is around security. Firstly, this is around data. Where is data held? How is data held? Second one, more explicitly, just literally about security and privacy of are security processes for each vendor adequate? And the third one's around permissions. It's very, very, very difficult to track for any single employee today in a business of, do they have a standard set of permissions? So if there's a metric you want them or don't want them to see, it is not easy to say. So for example, let's say there might be a member of your business that you want to see financial data for the business, but not payroll. Very standard request. Quite difficult to actually do without using some more draconian things of actually you just can't see that bit of software. Because it's difficult to set permissions with sufficient granularity and across apps. Next one, productivity. With all these different vendors, users are having to learn new user interfaces, changing features, etc., all the time. Quite a burden on productivity. The next one is hinted at in the previous slide, metrics and definitions. Users are having to set things again and again and again in different apps. And thirdly, and maybe I won't say most importantly, but it's one that's definitely dear to my heart, is app interoperability. Xero with the App Store does a really good job of a hub and spoke model of all the apps talk back to Xero. But the ecosystem today for finance and accounting does a truly disastrous job of the apps in any way talking to each other. So we're in a place where we have very bad app interoperability and all the limits and constraints that puts on productivity. And finally, but hugely important, I think pertinent for a lot of you, is AI readiness. When your data and the settings and the permissions are fragmented across, frankly, dozens of apps, it's very difficult for a business to argue it's in a place for AI readiness because the data is not in a place that it can be used. So that's the final one. So those are the four categories I use to think about the problems of today's software abundance. So what is the smart money doing? So for enterprises, the company I always say is worth watching is Snowflake. Now, I know Snowflake will be familiar to many of you because it is the leading data warehouse vendor. And many of you are probably already Snowflake customers. But as well as being a data warehouse, Snowflake is the innovator, not the only vendor doing this, but the innovator of a really interesting trend. And what they've done is they've created a marketplace that is very different than the likes of the Shopify or the Xero or the Salesforce marketplace. Because what they're doing is they're basically saying, keep your database, but bring the app. So I sort of liken it to the difference between going to a restaurant and getting your drink and BYOB. So they've totally separated the database. And what they are saying to enterprises is you've already got your data in a Snowflake database. So when you buy an app, rather than buying the app with its own database and your data being subjected to that different security profile, different data location, different permission profile, etc. Instead, bring the app so that it plugs in to your Snowflake database. So you know where your data is, you know the security around it and things like that. And that's the sort of Snowflake app store that they've been building, a very, very different way of doing an app store and a way that does centralize their software usage, and is one way that is a very popular way of dealing with this software abundance. Doesn't solve all the problems I talked about, but very, very popular. Also very expensive, requires a lot of internal expertise and needs a lot of vendors to sort of agree to go with it. But it's definitely a trend to watch. But right now it's one only really for enterprises, but absolutely a company to watch when you think about software abundance. For SMBs, a very different company to watch. And it's a company called Rippling. And Rippling, it started out as a payroll and HR company out of America and founded by a very, very interesting entrepreneur called Parker Conrad. And really worth seeking out Parker Conrad on podcasts and interviews and things like that. He's done quite a few. He's a very thoughtful guy, really, really worth listening to. Invest Like the Best is one podcast series I know he's done an interview with. Really worth listening to. And Parker has built this company, Rippling, into a multi-billion, I can't remember the exact valuation, 10 billion plus today. Only founded in 2017, so it's gone there very quickly. But the reason they've grown so quickly and the reason they're worth watching is they've literally pioneered a new business model, and they call it a compound startup. And what a compound startup is it is a software business that aims from its very beginning to launch every single app related to a type of data. So as I mentioned before, they special in HR or people data. So what they set out to do is say, well, wait a second, if we've gone to the effort to organize and orchestrate and secure the HR and people data, surely it makes sense for users for us to then be every app they need around that data. And that's what they built. So as a compound startup for people in HR, Rippling do everything from payroll to mat and pat leave, to device management, to expenses, to employer of record around the world. I won't pretend to know all the apps. I think they're way past 30 apps today. But what they're doing is they're saying to their clients is, actually, you don't want your data, your people and your HR data fragmented everywhere. You want it consolidated in one place, and then you want to be able to operate all the workflows on that coherent data set that is secure, etc., etc. And so that is what a compound startup does, and that's the business model they've innovated, and that's the success they had. And lots of companies in different industries around the world are now following them. VCs are very excited. You'll see a lot of investments for compound startups now, because it is realized to be a very, very sensible business model for the era we're now in. And once again, I'm going to take a quick drink. So why is it so interesting? And again, I'm just going to quickly go through some of the problems we talked about for software abundance. So payment and cost. So what does a compound startup do? Well, you're no longer overpaying. You only pay for the apps you use, and each app has been built in, with its sibling apps. So there's no overlap of functionality and you're not paying twice. Vendor management's gone away as a problem. You only have one vendor to manage. Security, well, your data isn't fragmented. It's all in one place. All the apps have the same high security settings. The permission is set by data set, not by app. So once you've set that a user has access to a certain amount of data or a certain piece of data, that's done across all the apps. Productivity, because all the apps have the same UX, there's little for users to learn to adopt different apps. Definitions, again, sense one. All the apps are designed to work seamlessly together. And AI readiness, all the data's in one place, ready for AI. So hopefully that articulates why compound startups are seen as such a powerful business model, and indeed the successor business model to what we've seen in the past year with one company, one app, which is many VCs as a business model that will definitely evolve away from its popularity today. So I've rather boldly said the company for CFOs to watch is Translucent. So hopefully you'll apologise the tall poppiness in doing that. As I said, what we're doing at Translucent is we're trying to fill the Xero NetSuite gap. And the way we're doing that is we are building the compound startup for finance and accounting. So what we're building is app after app after app for this data set. So what we can do is we can take multiple Xero files and other accounting softwares around the world. We're still building up that list. It's quite short today. We're still a young company. But the aim is to add accounting softwares from around the world so that as you expand around the world, you are able to just plug your software, your local accounting software into Translucent and get that consolidated data set that we just talked about that Rippling has for people in HR. And as I say, we're building app after app after app. So the first app we built was multi-entity search. So all your data is in one place with Translucent. So of course you should be able to search rather than going into different accounting softwares or different files. Next thing we built is group reporting, just exactly what you'd expect, to your P&L, balance sheet, trial balances, etc. Then live spreadsheets. Of course, if all your data is in one place, it's useful to be able to query it with Google Sheets and stuff. So we can do that. Next one was bookkeeping audit. Well, if you're managing a multi-entity business, you want to see where the bookkeeping's at, where the work is to be done, where the problems are. So that was the next app we built. Intercompany audit and transfers. Of course, again, if you're a multi-entity business, you need to be able to see your intercompany loan positions. You need to be able to write intercompany transactions. You need to be able to automate and make them efficient. That was the next app we built. And the app coming out this quarter is bank consolidation. So we aim to launch an app a quarter. So hopefully that gives a sort of sign of what we're doing, launching app after app after app, all in the same place. I would here do a note of caution. So if I was being a bit tall poppy, saying we're the app to watch, I would definitely say we are still a young business. Each of our apps is quite youthful, which is a way of saying I'm sure as and when you test them, there'll be some features we don't yet have. We're still building out. I'm pleased to say we've got very high engineering productivity, so each app matures every week. But we are still young and we are still growing. A bit more about Translucent. I'm really proud who we're backed by CEOs and or founders of quite a few businesses you'll know being in the industry. And finally, we're now in Australia. We just started our Australian team just over a month ago with Lauren, who I work for with at Receipt Bank. She's based in Sydney. And so we're now in Australia as well. And at that, I will stop talking and take any questions.
Okay. I need someone to turn my video on. But okay, my videos are not coming on, but I'm sure someone who's listening, there, start my video. Now thank you. Thank you so much, Michael, for that very inspirational talk. I always learn so much from you. People are encouraged to jump into the Q&A area and ask any questions of Michael. I remember while I'm waiting for any questions to come through, I remember the first time I heard Rod Drury speak, and he was so frustrated. And he was saying, this is the way it should work. And I was like, yeah, but what's the problem? All you need to do is this and this and this and this and this and this and this, and then you get there. What's your problem? And he's like, boom, boom. That's how I want to get there. And it's kind of, that's the same thing I'm hearing from you today in terms of we put up with things. I love my apps. But I think the key word there was, and I'm not sure if I can pronounce it, interoperability, which is I just put up with the fact that I have to get this and pop it into here, and I have to go through the authenticator to log on to everything each time I do something, which you very much.
And you're absolutely right. We, in the desktop era, we were very used to not really seeking out software. There was an awful lot of just jumping into Microsoft Office for whatever problem needed to be done, or indeed the pad of paper, which frankly I still have in front of me. But now equally, we're just used to, jumping from vendor to vendor to vendor. And so I talked about the number of software apps that exists across a business, but we're all incredibly familiar with our daily day, if that's a phrase, our daily day being just jumping from app to app to app. It's like, oh, I'm now doing that task, I've got to go there. I'm now doing there, I've got to go there. And, whether it's downloading to the desktop and then uploading, like even building that presentation today, the number of apps I was going in and out, pulling data from, going back, we are doing a huge amount of the interoperability ourselves today. And that looks normal and feels normal, but it really won't in the years to come.
Yeah,
and I noticed
very
that
much
some people, exactly. And I noticed that some people have jumped into the chat and talking about number apps, and there's one sort of saying 20 plus, and there's another saying 242.
That was me. Someone has asked if you're sort of focused on Xero or you're available. Oh, sorry, Translucent is available for QuickBooks and MYOB.
So today we integrate with Xero and QuickBooks. We don't actually integrate with MYOB at this point. Okay. So as I say, we expect in time, the way I think about it is there's about 40 countries in the OECD. And so our aim is to get coverage of those. So for those of you that have subsidiaries or entities in Germany with Datev, or France with Penny Lane, or various other sort of softwares around the world, our aim is to integrate with those so that you still have one coherent data set, one coherent solution, and crucially, of course, for your work, one set of numbers. So that's what we're doing. But right now, we're concentrating on building apps rather than building out new integrations. But yeah, the list. So right now we have QuickBooks, Xero, and that's Penny Lane, which is one might call the Xero for France.
Very good, very good. So we have had a question. How would you tackle clients who are cautious of apps? It can be a big cost to transition, and usually a trial period is not long enough to see the benefits.
It's such a big question, that, isn't it? Because what's inherent in that question is of course the psychology and the mindset and the enthusiasm of the client, which is just such a piece of string. I remember at Receipt Bank we toyed a lot with what the trial period should be. Should it be 4 weeks? Should it be 2 weeks? And what in the end we found was the more time you give people, the more time they take. And actually shortening the trial period, normally someone needs an hour, and it's just when they end up scheduling that hour. So giving someone 6 months or giving someone 3 months or indeed giving someone a month, all you end up really doing is postponing when they do that hour. And actually at one stage in Receipt Bank, I was very keen to get away from the standard 2-week trial to a 3-day trial based on that logic. Everyone else pushed back, which just shows that even when you're the founder of a business, you don't always get your own way. But it's a very difficult question to answer. The things I would emphasize is just the benefits are there, and sometimes it's worth just jumping in. You can always back out later. No software choice is for life. I don't know if you guys in Australia had the same sort of campaigns we used to have when we were young about, A pet is for life, not just for Christmas. Of course, software is exactly the opposite. It doesn't need to be for so long.
Yeah.
That's everything I'd say.
And it's absolutely about the benefits, the reporting benefits, and the time-saving benefits. We have another question. We have the same issues when we built a healthcare management business with multiple applications causing more issues than bringing efficiency. Now we're building our own industry-specific product. How will your product integrate with individual business products? So I imagine sort of beyond Xero.
Yeah, so we integrate with the accounting products, and we will do some integrations with some different sort of finance and accounting apps. We don't do any yet. We will be building an API to sort of enable people to do that. Because of course, people like the writer of this question, they often have their own sort of very specific apps they need. In general, as a compound startup, we are making the decision to build our own apps. As we say, we think that's the way to to give our users most of the benefits. They have the same UX, you've got the standard security permissions, etc. By integrating, we are slightly diluting those benefits. So generally, we are saying, we are building the suite of apps that give all those benefits. And if there's still a bit of fragmentation because you're using an app there, that's still better than the status quo today.
And we have another question. Oh, no, we're going to... another question. From your perspective, is there as much emphasis being made to improve build on existing features in apps such as Dex or Xero, as opposed to releasing new apps?
Can I just jump into the question before that? Because I know we're almost at the end. It's just the question before was about security. Someone asked, what measures does Translucent take to ensure data security and compliance? So one thing I would say, whether it's Translucent or anyone, you really, really need to make sure your apps, who your vendors are ISO or SOC. Either they've got it or they're on the way to getting it. On the way to getting it is really, really good. We're a new business. That's where we're at. That's where we're at currently. If someone either can't demonstrate they've either started that process or have completed that process, I would step back from them as a vendor. You need to know that your data security is taken seriously. You need to be able to ask for pen test results. What was the results of the last pen test? You should be able to ask for, if you don't have your own security questionnaires, can you share me the most recent security questionnaire you did, or something like that. It's absolutely right to take data security very, very seriously. A number of smaller teams, smaller apps, they're not negligent in this area. It's just not the highest priority. And so one needs to be careful. So I just wanted to touch on data security because it's such a big point.
Absolutely.
And the next up, and Heather, to your final question, I know we've got to wrap up. Is there as much emphasis being made to improve build on existing features and apps as new app products? So in Translucent, I'm really proud to say, well, actually, we've raised a lot of money. So we do both simultaneously. So all our apps have new features launched every week, literally every week, whilst we also build new apps. So we do both. And we have to do both because our apps are very new. Frankly, in some ways, they're quite immature. And certainly immature compared to, apps. We have app competitors that have been around for 10 years. So our apps, we have to both improve existing features every day and release new app products. For other vendors, everyone's making their own sort of path on this of where they prioritize and what they see the need. So I can't really speak to anyone else. No longer on the management team or the board of Dexter or anything. So I don't have any insights there.
Thank you, Michael. Again, fabulous session.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for listening to the Accounting Apps podcast. I was delighted to be able to share the audio from the Australian CFO Summit produced by Weel. To learn more about Weel's expense management solution, visit letsweel.com. For more information about Michael Wood's company, visit translucent.io. Remember, the Translucent team are on the ground in Australia and dedicated to serving Australia and New Zealand in their own time zone. Stay up to date with the curated accounting technology content I'm sharing by subscribing to this podcast, signing up to the Accounting Apps newsletter at heathersmithau.com, and joining the Accounting Apps Mastermind Group.